Yeah, so this afternoon I wanted to talk about well, actually I wanted to talk about one thing, and it's not quite hatched yet, so I'm going to talk about something that I have talked about before. So I want to talk about wisdom and delusion and wisdom. And I love the word for delusion, so I probably use it quite a lot. So that word is moha. And I think I mentioned the words for craving and aversion. I didn't use them that much, but so craving, lobha, tanha, sometimes thirst, but in terms of the greed, hatred, and delusion sort of trio, it's lobha, dosa, moha. Great sounding words. So moha, delusion, is the most difficult of the poisons to recognize in our experience, in some ways. I think it's the most pervasive. It underpins the others. Whenever craving or aversion is in the mind, then delusion will already be there. So it's quite colorless, moha. I think in some of its forms, it's sometimes think of it as a bit like the amniotic fluid that we swim in, or the air that's all around us, so we don't see it, but it's impacting on us. So it impacts on us to the extent that delusion, to the extent that wisdom is not present or not being sort of enacted through us. So one way of talking about moha is it obscures reality from us. It obscures the true nature of things. And then it's, if you like, it's partly why we act out of greed and aversion. It's on the basis of not seeing things clearly to start with. We then act out. So the way to uproot delusion, moha, is firstly to recognize it. I think the power of awareness is of seeing things that we don't usually look for. And it's also, I think, the helpfulness of having some information, that first level of wisdom where we have some sort of understanding of what it is we could be looking for, even. So the first thing is to recognize it, and the second thing is to grow wisdom, to actively sort of cultivate the conditions that support wisdom arising. So one of the ways in which we can learn to recognize moha is seeing, understanding that it often gets things wrong. It pays attention to concepts. It pays attention to ideas about things. It's currency almost. And if we do that, then we're already in a realm of inaccuracy. The perception takes a rough guess at what's happening, a best guess, or perception takes lots of shortcuts in order for us to recognize a uniform reality. So Sayadaw U Tejaniya says, moha always pays attention to concepts, and then defilements come. From not seeing things clearly, from this sort of these misperceptions, it opens the way for misunderstandings to happen. So it might be something I mean, it's very helpful. Perception's very, very helpful. Obviously, we all have a sort of common agreement on that a table has a flat top and usually 4 legs, occasionally 3 legs. But we it's really helpful to sort of share a reality and not have to sort of go through a bit of a long-winded process every time we want to put our cup on the table or something to establish it really is a table. So concepts are really, really useful. But as I've been saying through the week, we have this over-reliance on concepts and we don't recognize their limitations. And it means that we tend to underuse being with our direct experience, which can perhaps give us a more accurate sense of something. So we have a concept of rain, but rain is not the experience. It's an idea about the experience. The experience is that of sound. If I'm in the kuti, it's sound. If I'm outside in it, it's the experience of certain sensations on my skin from rain falling on the skin. So in the practice, we're aiming to get a sense of just what it's like to be with direct experience. I think it's Charlotte Yoko Beck, the Zen teacher, who talks about how it can be difficult to get a taste for this because it doesn't have a lot of drama in it. But once we get the taste, then it's very appealing, it's very attractive. She makes it sound quite simple. I think it can, there's a lot in us that, that is attracted to or has the habits around drama, whether we like it or don't like it. Sometimes one of the worst things we can say about something is that it's dull or it's boring. But actually there can be a subtle sort of peacefulness in the ordinariness of awareness that's like nothing else, actually. So we start to tune in with moha, with how the mind is operating. Watch what moha does. How does it think? How does it feel? So as well as moha meaning delusion, it's also obviously talked about as ignorance. So that sense of ignoring, ignorance ignores, and that's also where this rough guess shortcut comes in. We can sort of edit out things perhaps that we'd rather not see or hear or be in touch with, and overemphasize the pleasurable aspects of things that we do want. I have a lovely little quote by Subhuti around this. I can find it later. So I spent quite a lot of time on one of my retreats in Burma. I think I have probably had a retreat where I went through a different poison, but I vividly remember the one where there was a lot of focus on moha, on delusion. And so I wrote a job description for moha. I got to know certain aspects of it quite well, and I just sort of put it into a bit of a job description. So moha's job description includes time wasting. It doesn't really want to change. It's quite happy with the status quo. It likes wool gathering. It likes generating confusion and doubt and this sort of don't know mind. And it quite enjoys spending whole meditations like that, so that nothing really changes, nothing really gets done. So what we need is awareness, even in its sort of junior office clerk role, to just get a little foot in the door and be able to recognize, this is what's happening. This sort of slightly dreamy or dullness in the mind. Just recognize it for what it is. Okay, so there's dullness in the mind. There's don't know mind. Don't know what to do. Oh, how does that feel? How does that feel in the experience? And in this way, we can get a sense of the sorts of states that come under Moha's remit, if you like. And it can just be really helpful, as with anything, once we label it, once we have some, that's what it is, we objectify it in some way. It no longer becomes this state that I'm just sort of awash with, I'm just sort of swimming in it. But actually there's some objectivity around it. So the other aspect of Moha that's quite strong is to do with wrong views. And this is the book that you're not getting, which is when I wanted to look into the big wrong views around reality and around the viparyasas. So I'm just going to say a few things about wrong views in general, rather than look at these really sort of big ones. So Moha can tend to think in absolutes. So if you find yourself thinking, yeah, that's right, and the other option is wrong, or she's wrong, he always does that, or she never cleans up after she's cooked, or whatever it is. If we find ourselves sort of in absolutes, it usually means that there's some degree of wrong view. There's very little nuance there, which again is that rough approximation of something. There's often quite a degree of certainty in wrong views. So watch out for false certainty. There's often quite strong feeling behind it as well. So again, as with the absolute, there's just one option. There isn't a plan B or some degree of flexibility in the thinking. And if you're in a meeting and either you find yourself behaving like this or there's somebody else and one of you can't budge off what your idea is, it's very difficult to sort of work with, and how much more smoothly a meeting can go if there's some degree of openness and flexibility. That plan B is always a possibility. So this is U Tejaniya again. He says, assumption, presumption, and speculation are always the work of Moha, always the work of delusion. So when we assume something, again, we're sort of rounding things up, but it's not necessarily very accurate. Or we speculate. We can get into a lot of trouble when we speculate, particularly about other people's motives, and get it really, really wrong. Perhaps we think that someone's really cross with us, but actually maybe they just said something in quite a confident way or a slightly forceful way. We can misread those cues very easily, depending on our own conditioning. So in the I think, yeah, don't know which Abhidharma, maybe the Theravada Abhidharma. There's 4 aspects of moha, which I quite like. I think they illuminate something for me. So one is this delusion to start with. It's pretty that sort of unclarity, delusion, confusion. But then the second thing is restlessness. So I think restlessness, sometimes we act prematurely. There's untimely action or untimely speech. It just sort of comes out through us not acting from a place that's settled and clear. So that restlessness can sometimes block sort of wise action. And then the third one is shamelessness. So I think this is the same as anatrapya in the 51 mental events. Subhuti says there that anatrapya and anhirikya, I'm not sure, confident of them in the Sanskrit, but both are present in every unskillful act. So they must be connected with this type of delusion. So shamelessness, it's a sort of, I don't care, it's probably not very wise, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's that sort of against our better judgment, or perhaps against the judgment of others, how we should act well. And then there's fearlessness, which obviously usually we associate in a very positive way. But this is a sort of, again, it's a bit of a reckless or rashness. I've written an unholy boldness. When I was first ordained, I lived in London, and Dheera Prabha was quite close, and she for some reason she decided that my name was really Holy Boldness. That was what. And so this is a bit of an unholy boldness, fearlessness. So all different aspects of delusion. There's a lot in delusion, I think. So growing wisdom. Oh no, actually there's something else around. No. Okay. So we want to recognize wisdom in the mind on whatever level. And I think the 3 levels of wisdom are quite a helpful framework, this, because we can recognize wisdom by remembering the teaching, by remembering a teaching that we've learnt, that we know about. It can come into the mind at just the right time, and it can illuminate the mind. And then with the second level of wisdom, it can be something that we apply that information. Maybe it's come into our mind, and then we apply it to our experience, we apply it to the practice, we experiment, and we learn for ourselves. So if you like, we make that teaching, we get to have a feel for it, and maybe we see the effects of it in small insights in the mind, or things that illuminate what's happened. I think a lot of the work in practice happens in this second level of wisdom. And I think the thing about experimentation is really important. I think that we're not scared to make mistakes, or to go a bit too far one way and then have to sort of backtrack. But actually we've learned something for ourselves in doing that. I remember Joseph Goldstein once saying something like, it's really important not to be too timid in practice. I mean, obviously, we don't want to be the reckless and rash ones too much of the time either, but a sense of really being willing to experiment and try something out and not just stick to it because that's what I've been told to do or that's what the practice is. But how is it to play with that? So I think there's potentially a lot of learning there, and the smaller understandings that we have on the second level of wisdom really pave the way, if you like. They create the conditions for bigger understandings or deeper understandings in the third level of wisdom, where those understandings will have the potential to be irreversible. I don't know that they always are, but we can have, certainly very strong understandings, and if we're able to sort of keep working, then those understandings have a chance to grow deeper or to just become more the way that we see things. Our perspective can be altered. Yeah, so what was I saying there? It's because, recognizing wisdom in the mind, I don't think it necessarily means we need to know what level of wisdom we're recognizing, though that can be helpful. All right, bringing in that teaching. We can take it for granted that we bring in the teaching, but actually, if we recognize even that first level of wisdom, then it can be very confidence giving. I'm using the Dharma, I'm using the teaching. I'm applying it to my experience in this moment. Or we really take into account those moments where the mind feels more flexible. It has an openness and a clarity. And we can feel that we understand things maybe in a slightly different way. And maybe it's quite small. Maybe it happens, like for me, McCall's up the road, little understandings. And sometimes, but they might be small, but it doesn't mean they're unimportant. It doesn't mean they're insignificant. And we can learn a lot through that clear recognition. And the more that we're able to recognize wisdom in the mind, the more we encourage it to linger. We give it a bit more weight, and we, in a way, those scales of wisdom and delusion, we're just putting a little bit more weight on the wisdom set of scales. So bringing in right view really helps the mind's wisdom to grow, to see more clearly. And recognizing if a right view is present. And I acknowledge that the right view can be a little bit of a tricky concept to get your head around. What does she mean, right view? So how are you relating to experience? That can be a little bit more accessible. How am I relating to what's happening? How much is that sense of me being involved here, being quite sort of identified with what's happening? How strong is that sense of self, or how much is the relationship one of just recognizing aspects of experience as they happen, recognizing clinging in the mind, but not from sort of deep within it, more from being able to sort of see its nature, see its characteristics. Or, as we were doing this morning, recognizing a thought in the mind. I think that there can be a lot of helpful work through this quality of interest or curiosity. So sometimes when things like, so perhaps we've had some sort of klesha in the mind, maybe there's been some anger in the mind, and it it disappears. We're practicing, we're being aware of it, and it disappears. It decreases strongly. So do we know why? Do we understand the causes and conditions that have changed that led to that decrease? And one thing I think that's very tempting to do is to look to understand through having a guess. Oh, I think it was because of that, or making some sort of assumption, and then we're back in the territory of moha. So if we don't know, we don't know, and that's fine. We don't know why there was that decrease, but we can be curious about what were the conditions that led to any factor in the mind increasing or decreasing. You know, understanding what has conditioned it. And I think that just stressing that the main way to understand is through awareness and right view, rather than through trying to think about it. It's not something the thinking mind is necessarily that good at. Though actually where thinking can come in is when you're not in a period of, it's quite possible to set some time aside and think about the practice, or to reflect on how is the practice going, what's been happening, what am I learning, or where did I get things, my knickers in a bit of a twist then, and those sorts of looking back and thinking about the practice can be very helpful. And it might lead to us setting intentions for future practice. It might be that within the practice we weren't able to notice that actually maybe we were using a lot of energy, a lot of effort. But actually with a bit of space and a bit of reflection on it, we might think, oh, right, yes, I got really tense, and and it can just give you a sense of how you might want to approach it next time. And always just checking, aware, is mindfulness present? Reminding to check that, because that is the support for wisdom. So in this practice, the wisdom aspect of the practice is not really very directed or very explicit. I talk quite a bit about wisdom, but it is much more receptive. If you like, we come to wisdom, come to understanding through seeing what's already happening. How the self-construction project is happening. We don't need to think about that. We just need a few helpful ideas in the mind, and then to sit back and notice and observe what's happening. Yes, so that's why I don't particularly talk about the lakshanas in detail. Though, as I said, I would have liked to have done something on it. But and I have talked about dukkha. But the framing is much more about setting up conditions through which to be able to see more clearly. And in those setting up the conditions, it takes it out of the realm of personal effort. That I'm trying to see impermanence. I'm trying to understand this. Actually, okay. So yeah, so in this practice, you are not looking to have a particular agenda about what we are trying to do. It'll often then stay within the limits of what we already know about, because it's quite hard for the thinking mind to take itself into the territory that it doesn't know already. But actually, with awareness, and wisdom, there's much more possibility of that. I think that's all I've got to say. I haven't read you my diary excerpts from Burma. That's okay. Are there any just any sort of comments or questions based on anything I've said? Anything that feels like, oh, I don't really get that. Dharmavasta.
It was just an observation. I was thinking about the experience of the rain. I think sometimes I don't even get as far as rain because I look up the weather forecast and I don't believe what I see out the window.
I know that,
I think
yeah.
Technology is another layer that gets in the way.
It is. It's another layer of abstraction, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's that little poem I read by Denise Levertov about sometimes not wanting to sort of go up the hill or down the road for that witnessing presence. And just occasionally I'm like that. So rather than go down to the River Severn, which is about 200 meters away, maybe 250 at the most, to check the river levels, to see if I can cycle on the towpath, rather than go down, I'll look it up on my phone. Sometimes, yeah.
And it's not always right.
No, it's not. It's not.
And even if it's raining, it's quite different to what your idea of when you look at the black clouds on the on the weather forecast.
Yeah,
it's always all right. It's interesting, isn't it?
That is interesting. Yeah. So even if it's sort of accurate, if you like, the experience is still completely different. Yeah, to the concept. Yeah. Yeah. Garavavati.
Yeah, I was interested in what you're saying about sort of setting up the conditions in a way for wisdom to sort of arise, and that in that way, that in this practice it's more receptive, so that we're taking the me out of like I'm looking through the lens of the blackness and I'm trying to see more clearly. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about how it takes the me out of it.
Yeah. Okay. I guess partly right view does that by recognizing, it recognizes that when the view in the mind is like coupled with a belief in self or a view of self, and when what's happening in the mind is a bit more free of that, because so what it does is it each time right view is in the mind, it helps us recognize, oh, I've got that idea in my mind of me, of a sense of me. And each time we see it and we know what the Buddha's perspective on it was, it's not that we have to believe that, but it just helps us not necessarily buy in or identify with that, with what we're seeing as true. That idea, so we're more able to see, this is an idea arising in the mind. in this moment. That's what the practice is encouraging us to do. So in that sense, we're not actively taking the me out, but we're more accurately seeing what's happening in the moment, and that to the degree that we are seeing more accurately, there can be less belief in or just taking that view as read, that belief as read. And I think that another way is through the perspective of Praticca Samuppada. Just the perspectives of lots of different sort of conditioning factors in the body and the mind. And the more able we recognize, even with that perspective, very, very lightly in the back of the mind, what are we observing? What are we observing when what we're seeing are different conditions that perhaps lead to different qualities in the mind. And the more that the more that we can encourage in a very receptive way, the more that we can encourage certain qualities, they will help us see more clearly. They'll help things be seen more clearly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, let's stop there, and let's have 25 minutes, so come back. So I'm going to read something by from Charlotte Yoko Beck, and then we'll just sit for 25 minutes. It's not that I hear the birds, it's just hearing the birds. Let yourself be hearing, seeing, thinking. It is the false I that interrupts the wonder, with the constant desire to think about I. And all the while the wonder is occurring. The birds sing, the cars go by, the body sensations continue, the heart is beating. Life is a second by second miracle, but dreaming our I dreams, we miss it. end with a reading from Bhante, from Living with Awareness. To know something, indeed to know anything, seems naturally to call for a knower, as well as something that is known. But the Buddhist position runs counter to this intuitive knowledge. It asks us to note what we observe in our actual experience from moment to moment, and then ask ourselves whether we can really deduce from the stream of sense impressions alone the presence of a permanent self that has all these experiences. Obviously, this is a question to which a negative answer is expected. According to Buddhist philosophy, all we can say with certainty is that consciousness exists. The unchanging self or soul that is supposedly the source of that consciousness is something we have added on, an illusion produced by the very activity of dualistic thinking. It is our belief in its existence that ultimately holds us back from insight into the nature of things as they really are. And if we can convince ourselves through our own observation that this self is an illusion, the fetter will be broken.